Start this recording for the session on alcohol and health. If you have any questions, please place them in the chat, which I can view, but right now my only image I can see is of the slide. I've also invited my husband to pop in as needed, just because many of the health impacts of alcohol are within the GI tract, and I thought it'd be good for you to hear some of that, as well as if you have any specific questions. I've tried to make this a little bit fun for you all too, but with some information as we enter the holiday season. So when we talk about alcohol, we have to define it. What is it? I wanted to talk about the history of alcohol, kind of some of the injuries and deaths that are resulting from it. We all know that alcohol can be an issue for many people. How does it metabolized? What is considered a drink? Long-term effects, some of the cardiovascular effects, pregnancy and breastfeeding, and what are the genetic and gender differences when somebody consumes alcohol. I won't be discussing acute alcohol intoxication, abuse, end-stage cirrhosis, or any of the things we see in the hospital due to alcohol, because we're right now sitting here as outpatients and trying to look at alcohol in terms of a healthy lifestyle balance and choice. So this is a whole topic we can always talk about in the future if anyone's really interested. Just last night, for your information, I did a quick PubMed search, keying in the terms alcohol and health, and came up with 184,176 articles written on the topic. And that isn't even going back into ancient history, which is over 18,000 pages of information. So this is a well-documented, controversial body of literature that is still continuing to evolve. So no wonder when I speak and everyone says, well, I heard this. Well, you can tell how murky the literature can get. So what is alcohol? If you had to visualize the substance, it is a 2-carbon, 6-hydrogen, 1-oxygen molecule. We're pretty good metabolizers of these components. It is formed by natural fermentation of sugars, and it is the intoxicating constituent of wine, beer, and spirits. It's also used as an industrial solvent and as a fuel, ethanol. There are other forms of alcohols, methanol, isopropyl alcohol, which are not meant to be consumed. And I thought this was kind of cool. This is a 3D rendering of the actual alcohol substance, or molecule, I should say. A historical perspective. Alcohol has been around for eons. Evidence exists that intentionally fermented beverages existed as early as 10,000 BC, in the Neolithic period. The ability to metabolize alcohol predates humanity. Primates were eating fermented fruit. The medicinal use of alcohol was mentioned in the Sumerian and Egyptian texts around 2100 BC. The Hebrew Bible even recommended giving alcoholic drinks to those dying or depressed so that they can forget their misery. And it's quoted in the Proverbs 31, 6-7. Wine was consumed in Greece at breakfast or at symposia or meetings. And in the 1st century BC, it was part of the diet of most Roman citizens. Both the Greeks and the Romans generally drank diluted wine. the strength varying from 1 part wine and 1 part water to 1 part wine and 4 parts water. So when we see some of the older images, we have to think that this is likely diluted. In Europe and during the Middle Ages, beer, often of very low strength, was an everyday drink for all ages. Alcohol distillation likely originated in ancient India, and it was actually mentioned in the ancient Ayurvedic texts as both beneficial, and the consequences of intoxication concluded that alcohol was a medicine if consumed in moderation, but a poison if consumed in excess. And this is thousands of years old, and we're still questioning this. So I I found this all very interesting and thought it's important for us to just keep this in mind. The WHO now has concluded the harmful use of alcohol is a causal factor in more than 200 diseases and injury conditions. Worldwide, it's a cause of 3 million deaths annually, and that represents 5.3% of all deaths. Overall, 5.1% of the global burden of disease and injury is attributable to alcohol if you measure it in disability adjusted life years. Beyond the health consequences, the harmful use of alcohol brings social and economic losses to individuals and society. And then in our young folks, age 20 to 39, alcohol is the cause of approximately 13.5% of total deaths, and that's due to accidents and injuries. And there's a causal relationship between harmful use of alcohol and mental and behavioral disorders. So let's look at how alcohol is processed by the body. So after alcohol is swallowed, it is absorbed primarily from the small intestines into the veins that collect around our system and the stomach and bowels, and then taken to the liver. Where from there it's carried, then the alcohol is metabolized into using these enzymes, acetaldehyde, and it's metabolized into acetate, acetyl-CoA, and fat. Energy from alcohol is mostly stored as fat. The rate of rise of our blood alcohol content is influenced by how quickly the stomach is emptied and the extent of metabolism through the liver and the stomach. It's also influenced by environmental factors, such as how fast you're drinking. The more you put in, the quicker it's gonna accumulate. The presence of food in the stomach, which can slow down which can help process the alcohol out of your system and decrease absorption, and the type of alcohol. There's also genetic factors, which I'll mention later, regarding their slow metabolizers of alcohol, and there's sometimes some fast metabolizers. So the alcohol elimination rate varies widely, threefold among individuals. Also, if you drink chronically, if you depends on your diet, your age, if you're a smoker, and even the time of day, the rate of alcohol metabolism or elimination can change. The lungs and kidneys will excrete about 2 to 10% of circulatory ethanol. The more you drink, the more quick trips to the restroom. And dehydration is a cause of that hangover feeling we have. So it's not good to take Tylenol or something for that headache. It's better to try to rehydrate with electrolyte balance solutions. So what is a drink? That's a very confusing topic, even for scientists studying things. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans defines a standard drink as 12 ounces of a 5% alcohol content beer. And I've gone to like beer tastings and things, and now they're upping that content to 7 to 8%. 8 ounces of 7% malt liquor, 5 ounces of a 12% wine. So you have to look at the alcohol content on your wine bottles. In the US, and I'll talk about that a little later, we're at 14%, or 1.5 ounces of a 40% 80 proof liquor. All of these drinks contain the same amount in grams of pure alcohol, which is the molecule I showed you before. However, many common drinks contain much more alcohol. So if we look at 12 ounces of a 9% beer, that's nearly the same as drinking 2 drinks. Consuming one can be the equivalent of 2 standard drinks. So why don't we, I'm also bringing out questions that have come up during conversations or in the lay press recently. So why don't we feel drunk when consuming wine abroad? And it's in part due to the warmer climate of California, and most of the wines in the US are Californian-based wines. Most of its wines contain significantly more alcohol than the French wines from Burgundy, the Loire Valley, Bordeaux, Champagne, Alsace, Germany, because they have cooler or more temperate climates. So their alcohol content is much lower. Alcohol content in Italian and French table wines range from 7 to 13%, whereas our wines approximate 14% alcohol content. We also think of sulfites causing our headaches, and the tannins in our wines in the US maybe making us more prone to feeling drunk. But apparently, sulfites are felt to be equivalent between both European and US wines. The European labels, they don't actually mention sulfite content because it's not mandated in Europe. However, in the US, we have actually more additives and preservatives. If a European wine is certified as organic or natural or biodynamic, that's a good indicator that it contains no sulfites. Also, when it comes to European wines, they are commonly made using traditional winemaking methods, which means, again, less preservatives and additives are added. I'm showing you some images here from the Judgment of Paris, 1976, where the US wines entered, hit the map or the scene for winemaking. So we're only 50 years old in winemaking in the US that of significance, although, you know, historically there's been alcohol in this country since the Pilgrims arrived. But because of the rules, and we tend to add more additives, and we don't know what they are. And that's important to keep in mind to some of the toxicities that may be carcinogenic that I'm going to mention later. In Europe, this is a highly regulated and tested industry, and they do check for additives. So there are some consequences of those additives as well as concentration of alcohol. So there's an all-cause risk for cancer, of course, cirrhosis of the liver, kidney damage. There's a risk for Alzheimer's. If you drink more than 5 drinks a week or binge, you increase your risk for Alzheimer's. There's drug-drug interactions. There's some cardiac effects. It can affect all parts of the body. Regular drinkers might have a lifespan as much as 7 years shorter than non-drinkers. This is still being studied. So let's look at alcohol and cancers. If you think of alcohol as the image that I'd shown you previously, when it enters the mouth, and if there are additives that are toxic, they can do damage as it enters our airway, our larynx, our throat, the esophagus, absorbed into the liver, and the colon and rectum. The alcohol, when it's metabolized by the liver, it actually creates estrogen, which then increases the risk for breast cancer for women. So breaking it down for head and neck cancers, moderate drinkers have a 1.8-fold higher risk of oral cavity and throat cancers, and 1.4-fold higher risk of laryngeal, or where our vocal cords are, cancers than non-drinkers. Heavy drinkers up that risk by 5-fold. If you're a smoker, it actually exponentially increases those risks. Esophageal cancer at any level is associated with an increased risk of squamous cell carcinoma of the esophagus. The risks compared with no alcohol consumption range 1.3-fold higher for light drinking to nearly 5-fold higher. If you inherit a deficiency in the aldolase, the dehydrogenase enzyme that helps metabolize alcohol, they found to have an increased susceptibility for squamous cell carcinoma if you consume alcohol. Liver cancer is associated with heavy alcohol consumption, about 2-fold increase in hepatocellular carcinoma and intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma. Chris, do you want to step in and discuss some of these cancer risks with alcohol that you see?
Well, if I may, I want to emphasize what Asha was saying. Culturally, people often come to us as gastroenterologists when they talk about these things. She's saying alcohol has been part of life for a great time in our history. The key element that I want to emphasize is their alcohol is not our alcohol. Their alcohol not only was diluted, it was made in such a fashion that often it was a very high caloric drink used for workers. It was used because the water supply was poor, and the benefits of alcohol were often in preventing infection. So they used the alcohol to kill bacteria within the water. Its purpose, ceremonial and for drinking and socializing, was a later effect that occurred. And as the most religious texts would say, moderation in all things. We have discovered that alcohol is a major risk for essentially every cancer in the body. And we now counsel as such that you need to be very cautious about overuse of alcohol. Alcohol is a poison, and many poisons are used for various purposes. We use them as treatments, like in chemotherapy and such, but we're always very aware of how much. Society has now gotten to the point where bigger is better, whether in calories, whether in food portions, and they make things more concentrated and tell you, oh, more bang for the buck. But unfortunately, this is very dangerous, and that's why we are very cautious about how much alcohol use. We, as gastroenterologists, would quote 5 as a safe, 5 a week as a safe place for Alzheimer's and other things. But a max, a female liver being smaller and having different enzymes, we would be very concerned of anybody drinking over a drink a day. And men, anybody over 2 a day. We tell people if you go to a party and you have more alcohol than that, you should take days off to allow your body's enzymes to replace it. And I often explain it to people, yeah, you'll go along quite well drinking more than that amount and not notice it for a while. But it's like driving your automobile without oil. Eventually the engine's going to overheat, and then it's going to be permanently damaged. And that's how the body works. And the subtle signs of your body overheating is liver test elevations, sleep disruption, not feeling the same energy. And the body changes. As she mentioned, as Asha mentioned, the whole body will actually change in response to the disruption in its function due to alcohol. And that's what we classically see, the red nose, the enlargement of your middle body while your legs and arms become thin. We call it a spider appearance. Breasts in men. These are all things, signs that the alcohol is interrupting your system. But we want to catch it long before those things show up. The direct effects on bleeding and all the rest, are obvious and the main cause of what I do is people bleeding because the alcohol interferes with your clotting. Hence why they caution people who are on blood thinners, be very careful of your alcohol intake. Uh, I think, is there anything specifically beyond that?
No, I think you nailed it. And here are some of the hypothesized ways that at a metabolic level that alcohol may increase the risk of cancer. So when alcohol is metabolized to acetaldehyde, it creates a toxic chemical and a probable human carcinogen. So, as I put on the bottom of this slide, the National Toxicology Program of the US Department of Health has listed consumption of alcoholic beverages as a known human carcinogen. And in Europe, they actually label it that. Um, we know that acetaldehyde can damage both DNA and proteins. Also, alcohol can generate reactive oxygen particles um, through oxidation, and that can damage DNA, proteins, and fats. It impairs the body's ability to break down and absorb other nutrients because alcohol's sitting in the lining of your stomach and interferes with vitamin B and magnesium and other nutrient absorption. And then that may result in increasing your cancer risk because we need those nutrients to help repair ourselves from DNA breakage and damage. So we see in people who consume a lot of alcohol, all these nutrient deficiencies. And again, as I mentioned before, a higher blood level of estrogen, which has been linked to breast cancer. Alcohol may also contain carcinogenic contaminants that are introduced during fermentation and production, such as nitrosamines, asbestos fibers, phenols, and hydrocarbons. And there is some theory that renal cancers and some lymphomas, there may be a decrease, but they don't understand it. It may be that those folks may have a healthier lifestyle and may already be putting themselves at a lower risk. That's a little controversial right now. So what happens to the cancer risk after a person stops drinking? Like with smokers who stop, we can actually quantitate years from smoking and how, and in a formulaic manner, how you can reduce your risk. It never goes down to zero from if a smoker stops smoking, but there is a sequential drop in risk as years from abstinence go on. We do think that there has been some eventual decline in cancer risks, but it may take years for the risk of cancer to return to those of never drinkers. And this is for head and neck cancers, but it's not an immediate reduction in cancer risk. Ex-drinkers still have a higher risk of oral cavity and pharyngeal cancers than never drinkers, even 16 years after they stopped, although it definitely was lower than before they stopped drinking. One study estimated that it would take 35 years for that risk to come down to the never drinker level. What about dementia and memory? Interestingly, there was in February of this year, over 3 million people studied in Korea, looked at mild drinkers and showed that they actually had a decreased risk of all-cause dementia compared with moderate and heavy drinkers. And heavy drinkers had an 8% increased risk. Now, they defined no drinkers as 0 grams of alcohol, mild as less than 15 grams, which is what one drink is for us. Moderate is 1 to 2 drinks a day, and heavy is over 3. And here is what they defined in 8 grams was 1 volume. What we've seen is if you already have memory issues, studies are showing that even a little bit of alcohol can accelerate Alzheimer's disease progression by increasing the plaque formation in the brain. And they showed that there's a more number of the amyloid plaques, and they conclude that alcohol consumption, if you have Alzheimer's, is something you can do to decrease your risk for dementia. Now, what about the heart? Everybody's talking about, well, I drink a drink a day because I was told that it would be good for my heart. Well, there's all different aspects of the heart. There's clogged arteries, which is what they were talking about when they had made those recommendations. But then there's also cardiomyopathy, which is the size of the heart, the muscle of the heart function, heart failure, and then there's the heartbeat, which is the rhythm of the heart. Now, alcohol can act as a direct toxin to the muscles around the heart and impact the beating of the heart. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So we have to really keep in mind when they were making that, oh, drink 1 glass a day recommendation, and it was very much supported by the alcohol industry. It was for the blood clotting and clogging impact in coronary heart disease. But what they are looking at now is that maybe it's the lifestyle factors that attenuated these benefits of alcohol intake, and that if you look at it against the cancer risks, any alcohol consumption was associated with higher risk. They're now looking at exactly how does the stress level of drinking get attenuated, and then impacts the cardiovascular risk. And this was in the Journal of American College of Cardiology just in June this year. So they're saying, okay, we see this relaxation effect, we see some anti-inflammatory effect. What is the mechanism of that? So the jury's out on that impact, but we are seeing that while light to moderate drinkers lowered their overall risk for cardiovascular disease, it's not worth it in terms of the risk for cancer. So there's no medicinal benefit to drinking a drink every day. So they're now trying to backtrack that messaging that they had put out there about 10, 15 years ago. And this is coming from Mass General, and that was where the original resveratrol studies came out, which I'll talk about next. So what is resveratrol? It is a polyphenolic compound found in peanuts, grapes, red wine, and berries. It is supposed to be the healthy part of the grapes that are an antioxidant. And that was thought to be the source of its anti-atherogenic properties for improving your heart disease risks. In preclinical studies, it was shown to have lots of different biological activities. This is outside of the human body, and it was theorized to help cancer, cardiovascular disease, and even protect the brain. And in lab and animal models, it had been shown to inhibit growth of cancer cells in culture. So it was touted to be something as an anti-cancer treatment. 2 trials showed that consuming a grape supplement containing 8 milligrams a day of resveratrol improved inflammatory and atherogenic status in subjects at risk for cardiovascular disease and established coronary disease. However, there's no evidence that that content in red wine confers any risk reduction. And so we haven't yet seen that benefit. And it's now thought that people who are leading a better lifestyle might have a better risk profile. There has been a trial in diabetics that if you just did oral supplementation with resveratrol, glucose and lipid disorder metabolism improved in diabetics. But We don't know long-term if taking higher doses of resveratrol might affect pharmacokinetics of certain drugs, especially metabolized by the liver, and then increase toxicity of your medicines, including the ones that folks are on who are diabetic. So your diabetes medicines, your lipid medicines, and your hypertension medicines, and many of which are metabolized through the liver. So we just have to keep in mind that when we look at supplements in isolation, they may not be good. And as you know, I always say, why don't we just eat the rainbow instead of trying to take it as a supplement? And this is and from the Linus Pauling Institute, which usually is kind of on the edge. And I was surprised that they had put this out on their website as a caution. Now let's look at alcohol and heart rhythms. Many people are very surprised when they experience atrial arrhythmias or fibrillation, and they're like, had no idea alcohol was a risk factor. Um, Alcohol is both a chronic risk factor for developing new onset AFib and also an acute trigger for AFib episodes. So AFib occurs in up to 60% of binge drinkers with or without an underlying what we call alcoholic cardiomyopathy. Now, told you I wasn't going to talk about kind of if you've been drinking a lot for a long time, how the heart muscle can just start getting a little more relaxed and floppy. But that's for a long duration alcoholism can create that. Most cases of AFib occur during and following weekends or holidays when alcohol intake is increased, a phenomenon that we've been for decades have called the holiday heart syndrome. Even 1 to 2 drinks can trigger AFib in some people. There was a case crossover study. This is kind of interesting. 100 individuals free of alcohol dependence and with AFib wore this transdermal ethanol sensor, and they had continuous ECG monitoring for 4 weeks. Among the 56 people who had an AFib episode during this time, having had one alcohol drink doubled the odds of having AFib. Having 2 or more tripled the odds of an AFib episode in the next 4 hours after having consumed alcohol. So this demonstrated a probable dose response relationship between the amount of alcohol and the likelihood of triggering an AFib episode. So I thought it would be important for you all to see this. Now in pregnancy, I know I am, many of us are beyond that stage in our lives, but we have children or friends or family members who are in that stage of life. In my pre-medical school days, I actually worked for Dr. Ken Jones here at UCSD while I was an undergrad at UCSD. And I used to counsel on teratogens, and he was the founder of the teratogen registry, and this is back in the 80s. And he was looking at children and babies born with different features and trying to tie it to medications or alcohol or drugs or anything and trying to figure out a pattern. And he is the doctor who coined fetal alcohol syndrome. So we would get phone calls from all over the state and country of women who found out they were pregnant maybe at 2 months in and they had drank normally, and they wanted to know what is okay and what are their risks for having a child with birth defects. At the time, we would say it was unlikely to cause a significant issue. But in the decades since, we are now noticing that besides just abnormal facial features that can occur, which was the prominent aspect of fetal alcohol syndrome, shorter than average height, low body weight, poor coordination, hyperactivity, ADD, memory issues, learning disabilities, speech and language delays can occur. Some trouble with sleep can occur with the child, heart, kidney, bone trouble, vision problems. So it's now considered there's no safe amount of alcohol use during pregnancy or even while trying to get pregnant. Many people, I know my mother-in-law used to say, "Oh, I drank all the time when I was pregnant with um, your husband," or um, and maybe she was a good metabolizer. But right now, given what we know, there are disclaimers on wine and alcohol for all pregnant women. Now, what about breastfeeding? Not drinking alcohol is the safest option for breastfeeding mothers. However, they've been abstinent for 10 months and they may have want to celebrate or be out. Um, about one drink is not known to be harmful, especially if the mother waits at least 2 hours before nursing so that it's processed out of the mom's system. However, moderate exposure above that can definitely impact an infant's development, growth, sleep, learning. And then of course, if a mom is drinking any more than that, that her judgment is impaired and the ability to safely care for the child is put into question. So, ideally, no alcohol for breastfeeding mothers. If they have to, wait at least a couple hours after having had one drink before even nursing. So I tried to generate, as I mentioned earlier, literature from what you guys are reading today. Wall Street Journal, Vogue, Costco Connection. Just this month said alcohol and medicines. And I guess I have to say, every time I write a prescription, I don't warn you enough about mixing it with alcohol, but I will start more um, because 70% of us regularly consume alcohol, and about 42% are taking a medication that can interact with alcohol. Holidays are times when we forget that, just because of parties and activities. Um, we drink a little bit more than we intended. What can happen when we mix our daily medications with alcohol? We can feel extra sleepy. We can get dizzy. We can feel faint the next day. I mentioned the holiday heart syndrome. Our liver test can get abnormal if we mix alcohol with our blood thinners and then throw on board an Aleve or a Motrin. We can increase our risk for GI bleeding, nausea, vomiting. Our blood pressure can be too high or low. We're at increased risk for falls or accidents after having consumed alcohol and mixing it with our medicines. Um, Increase our risk of seizures, and even shortness of breath can occur if mix it with any pain meds. What are the drugs that can interfere with alcohol? Here are the broad categories, but here is the list. So, medications that should not be taken with alcohol: pain medications, opiates, oxycodone, hydrocodone, Aleve, Motrin, and even Tylenol. Remember, Tylenol is metabolized by the liver, and if you drink alcohol and then you're taking your nightly extra strength Tylenol, you can actually create a little bit of acetaminophen toxicity in your system. Anxiety and sleeping pills: Ativan, Xanax, Valium, clonazepam, Ambien, Lunesta, Sonata, Belsomra. Alcohol plus sleeping pills is extra sleepy combination, and increases your risk for low oxygen levels while asleep, shortness of breath, um, aggravating heart disease, angina, and heaven forbid if you have sleep apnea, and uh, would have aggravate that. The most dangerous part of drinking too much under the influence of these medications is not waking up in the morning. CNS medications, anything that goes for the brain: sertraline, which is Zoloft, Elavil, quetiapine, and your anti-seizure medicines can interact with alcohol. ADHD meds: Adderall, Ritalin and Vyvanse. We forget antibiotics interfere with alcohol. So azithromycin can cause nausea and vomiting, and so does alcohol. So alcohol can kind of increase that motilin gene to make you more nauseous if you take azithromycin. Flagyl and alcohol are a dangerous combination. Can increase flushing, hurt the liver. It's like an anabuse reaction. Bactrim and penicillins, alcohol diminishes the efficacy. So if you say you have a UTI or a sinus infection and you're on these antibiotics to help kill that, well, if you drink alcohol, you actually kind of cut the effect of those antibiotics in half. So it may take longer to get better, or you might not fully achieve the benefit of those antibiotics. Nitrates and other blood pressure medications interact with alcohol, and alcohol may actually increase the nitrate effect of blood vessel relaxation. So you may get lower blood pressure. Alcohol interacts with metformin, perhaps increasing its impact. So the next day, diabetics may have lower blood sugars. Warfarin and alcohol interact and increase the blood thinning impact of warfarin. Over-the-counter medications such as Sudafed, Mucinex, NyQuil all interact with alcohol. And then if you drink alcohol and have Viagra or Cialis, it drastically reduces the blood pressure and can cause dizziness. So it's important to keep these in mind. What about genetic differences? There's some people who can drink alcohol and never feel a thing, and then there's others who get flushed easily, and there's actually there's actually an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, or ADH, which I showed you earlier, converts ethanol into the carcinogenic metabolite acetaldehyde in the liver. It's also suggested by our recent analysis of the microbiome that it can, the oral cavity, we have some bacteria, and we can start making acetaldehyde in our oral cavity, but our oral microbiome and our gut microbiome may help kind of attenuate some of these effects. Many individuals of East Asian descent have a version of a gene for ADH that codes for a superactive form of this enzyme, and it can speed the conversion of ethanol into the toxic metabolite. Among people of Japanese descent, those who have this form of ADH have a higher risk of pancreatic cancer than those of us who have the more common enzyme. There's another enzyme, aldehyde dehydrogenase 2, that metabolizes the acetaldehyde to non-toxic substances. And those of East Asian descent carry a variant and that of a defective form of this. And so then they actually get the toxin acetaldehyde buildup when they drink alcohol. And they get the facial flushing and heart palpitations. And they're not unable to consume large amounts of alcohol. So the thought is because they have that flushing reaction, they may not drink very much and have a low risk of developing cancers. However, if you become tolerant to those flushing effects of alcohol, then they consume larger amounts and have a higher risk of esophageal and head and neck cancers. So Native Americans are a population that's being studied quite a bit, just because they've been noted to have some alcohol dependence issues. And it is, they're looking for a genetic mutation, but it has not been discovered yet, but it is suggested for the higher proportion of dependence in this population. More to follow. So what about consumption? As Chris mentioned earlier, Americans are drinking more with heavier pours than we know. So this was in the Wall Street Journal. Let me see, I've got it right here, October 21st. And it was a very interesting article, and this author has gotten a ton of letters since that. And what they did was they sent out about 30 people to go and be stealth drinkers at 10 different, 80 different establishments in 10 Northern California counties. And they measured, I don't know how they did it with this, like a chemical strips and volume things. They still did that in the bathroom or in a back room or in a back table while the servers weren't didn't notice. And they wanted to see exactly how much alcohol was being served. And did it depend on size of the glass, or and what type of drink was ordered? And in summary, nearly every drink contained more alcohol than what we considered the standard drink definition that I showed you by the CDC. Some nearly as twice as much. So it's very we are getting overpoured. This I just did this morning. This is what 5 ounces of alcohol is. And this was my wedding glass, wine glass from my wedding registry in 1993. So wine glasses were much smaller back in the, 30 years ago than they are today. And this is what the same 5 ounces looks like in a glass that's put on tables in restaurants today. And this is what 15 mLs in a shot looks like. And many of you, if you've ordered shots or anything, or even get shots on the side, you're filled twice as much. So, what is the relationship of alcohol consumption to mortality? Everyone's looking at, living longer and living to 100 and the blue zone. Longevity studies in the blue zones link diet, sleep, exercise, and some alcohol as keys to a long life, except Loma Linda, which is in the blue zone, which is a high population of Seventh-day Adventists or Mormons who don't consume any alcohol. If we look at these zones, these two are known for a plant-based diet. And as I mentioned earlier, old wine growing regions, different methods, different additives. And we know the Okinawans have a high fish in their diet, attributing their longevity. But they do all have some alcohol, and it's thought that really it may be that maybe healthier people can drink modestly instead of all people drinking for health. So studies had shown that if you don't drink, you might actually have a negative mortality risk. So the zero drinkers had an uptick in mortality, and then you drink less than 10 drinks and that's negative, and then more than 10 drinks a week, you've got a higher risk. So there's this little area here that people are analyzing a little bit more. And so after looking at more than 100 studies, no significant benefit from modest drinking. And the thought is that you might be a healthier person to start with a healthier diet, better sleep, and maybe you can handle a little bit of modest alcohol better than if you had a lot of medical conditions, you're on drugs and have these interactions, and then that alcohol becomes harmful for you. And that's why we're having this conversation, so that you can measure your lifestyle against your risks and benefits. So let's look at kind of why all of this is being pushed at us. So across the globe, over 446 billion liters of alcohol is consumed annually, most in the form of beer, lagers, and cider. And this is from alcohol.org. So if the human body contains 5 liters of blood, this is the bloodstream of 89 billion humans, 10 times the world population that we pump through our bodies each year. So very interesting. In the US, beer dominates, and then alcohol, wine, and then liquor sharing a big market share. And it's important to note that as we go forward, beer is now losing its market share compared to wine and liquor. And this is back in 2018. I think these numbers would change a bit, but AbbVie was the number one at that time in terms of which are the groups that are having high earnings. It's a multiples $1 billion industry. So they purposely want to keep us thinking it's medicinal. Alcohol affects women differently than men. And this is just a little lightheartedness in here. This is Mike Gergich of Gergich Hills. He was in the vintner that helped Chateau Montelena win for their wine back in the tasting of the competition of 1976 helped put California wines on the map. And so it was, and he is now 100 years old. So there's something to, you can still have alcohol and make it to 100, and there may be other factors involved. But there are definitely gender differences. Although men are more likely to drink alcohol and consume larger amounts, our biology definitely leads women to absorb more alcohol, and it takes us longer to metabolize it. After drinking the same amount of alcohol, women tend to have higher blood alcohol levels than men, and the immediate effects of alcohol occur quickly in women and last longer than in men. So we are more susceptible to the long-term negative health effects of alcohol compared with men. And this is where I just get outraged when I go out to dinner or anywhere. We are still served similar quantities as men. And when I order a beverage, I'll purposely say I'll have a margarita, but can I have it half a shot? The immediate response from the server is, but we're going to charge you full price. And I'm like, that's fine with me. And I still will dilute it with water. But this is where our feminism, our race for equity does us harm. So what happens if you stop drinking? And this is, an article in Vogue actually promoting cutting down. And this was just last month, saying there's physical benefits of teetotaling. And it's balancing our hormones, getting better sleep, less anxiety, having healthier skin because we're less dehydrated, a clearer mind, improves our blood pressure, our liver function. Heavier drinkers might find it's tough to wean off at first. You may feel a little shaky, a little irritable, a mood change. That'll take about a month to get over. But about a year later, your body will achieve the full benefits of these effects. Now, teetotaling is what I've been espousing to all of you, is just maybe socially on weekends, never on a daily basis. So, in summary, alcohol has a ton of effects on health. Short term, we can get intoxicated and dehydrated. It can change our metabolism in the liver, brain, and actually create alcoholism in some. Acute effects also slurred speech, clumsiness, delayed reflexes. And it also can stimulate insulin production, speeds up glucose metabolism, results in low blood sugar, making us irritable. And if you're a diabetic on those diabetic meds and drink alcohol, and then you haven't eaten much, your sugar could drop dangerously. We talked about the cancer risks and the warnings that there's no safe lower limit now. and in pregnancy fetal alcohol syndrome. This is a picture taken of um, a wine that was poured for me, and notice it doesn't even reach the halfway mark. And I purposely try to make it more water than alcohol, and do not let a refill happen. And this is dessert. So there's a way to teetotal all the way to dessert. Works that I've mentioned are from these sources, and I now open the session up to questions. I haven't seen anything in the chat group yet, so I will go ahead and stop recording so that we can have an open conversation. With that, I thank you and wish you all a very happy holiday season.